Hey, it's TDA and welcome to this step-by-step guide to Dyson Sphere Program. This series is intended for players that are relatively new to the game or are simply overwhelmed by the complexity. I will be covering everything you need to know in order to bring your factory to the next level, and if you want to play along with me, you can. Simply put in this seed in your new playthrough when you start the game, and you should find yourself on a world identical to mine. I will also be sharing my blueprint so you can simply copy paste my factory or just take a closer look at it for inspiration for your own builds. If you are a more experienced player, you might be interested in my combat preparation series that is coming out alongside this one. That will be based on this playthrough as well, but with a more strategic focus on preparing for the upcoming combat update. That means more condensed episodes in which I will be talking about the what and why of my designs rather than the nitty-gritty how to build this type of things with the basic tips and tricks that newer players might need. However, if you're still here, I assume you're a newer player, and we get a first look at our starting system. We have the starting planet, which is always kind of an Earth-like planet orbiting a gas giant. We also passed, I think, a lava planet. I'm not entirely sure what type of planet that is, the orange one over there. But we'll find out soon enough. For now, we are going to fly towards our starting planet, and I love the way the new clouds look. I'm not entirely sure when those got added to the game. It's been a while since I've played this, but the last time I checked it out in my previous 3 playthroughs, I'm pretty sure we didn't have clouds. So it makes the game that was already amazing looking look even better. So we are going to fly to the planet. There's no steering, no deciding where you land. It's always going to be in a pre-designated location. So let's skip to that actual landing. Oh man, look at those clouds. They look so nice and detailed. Anyway, we are about to touch down. There is actually an achievement for leaving the landing pad that will be left behind once the rocket flies off. Leaving that intact. So if you want that achievement, just continue playing the game without picking this up and just make sure you fuel your mech unit by farming some trees. But if you don't care about achievements or you just want to make life a little bit easier for yourself in the first 10 minutes, you can right click on this pad and start gathering it, and you will get some fuel cells from that. So it's completely up to you. I'm gonna go and remove this just so, because I already have the achievement. But if you want to leave it alone, you can without any downside. Okay, so since this is a series meant for beginners, I want to make sure you know everything you need to know. So first of all, you can change the looks of your mech. It has no functional effect on the game currently, so don't worry about it. I just like these color schemes better, and you can do that under the armor customization. But if you don't want to touch that, you don't need to. It doesn't actually have any impact on the game. What does have an impact on the game is the fuel in your fuel chamber. So you always want to make sure you have some fuel in your mech. And you do that by putting things like logs, plant fuel, or coal, etc. in there. If you took out the landing platform, you have some hydrogen fuel rods. You can make more of those later on. Those are very good for actually fueling your mech. So initially, that just makes life a little easier. And in order to get some of that fuel, just zoom out and shift right click, I would say, on these trees around you, and just start picking some of them up. It's a pretty good idea to also pick up some of these rocks that are lying all around, because you're going to need some of them. You might get some rare resources as well, like, let's see if I already have any. Yep, for example, like these organic crystals or titanium ore. You don't have a use for them right now, but I recommend just saving them because you can make your own life a little bit easier in the long run. Okay, so this is an automation game, which means we are going to build a factory and try to do as little work as we can ourselves in order to make sure that our factory is actually producing our goods for us. Now, in order to do that, we do have some iron vein over here, we have some copper veins over here, some other resources around as well, but we do want to think about where we are going to set up our initial factory. And in order to do that, I recommend zooming out by pressing the M button. And I also recommend pressing the N button, because that will automatically flip the planet around, just so you have the north side to the actual top of your screen, just like you would look on a map. If you are below the equator when you start, your planet might actually be flipped upside down, so the south pole might be to the top of your screen. That can be really disorienting, so pressing N just makes sure your planet is always facing the same direction on your screen. So that's important, but I was zooming out to find a good starting location. So let's see, we want a lot of iron ore where we start. So we have a lot of iron ore, for example, over here. We do want copper nearby, which we also have over here. And we also want stone, which we have over here in this corner. So actually this is a very good starting area because we have copper, iron, a lot of iron actually. There's even more iron over here, as well as stone all close by. As a bonus, we also have some coal over here. It's not immediately of use, but it's very handy to have it close by because you can actually fuel your mech with it, and it's a lot more efficient than cutting down all these trees. You can actually mine the coal as well. So all in all, this is a good starting location. So we are going to relocate over here. Okay, so since this is an automation game, we want to start building our factory as soon as we can and automate as much of the production as we can. So we go into the technology tree and select the first research, which is going to give us access to a mining machine as well as some power generation options. So we select that, and while you're at it, you might as well queue up the next few things. So this is going to allow us to get some belts going. We'll also want some way to smelt our ore automatically, which is what this technology does. And we want a assembler machine in order to make more complicated stuff. And then finally, we want this last research, which gives us access to blue science, as well as a matrix lab, which basically automates our science for us. So queue all of that up. You won't be able to instantly research all of that. But once you open the replicator screen by pressing F, you will be able to queue up a couple of these little magnetic coils, and since these are being produced with 2 at the same time, we run the recipe 5 times. You should see your research starting and you get access to your first mining machines. And with that done, we can set up our initial mining. So let's zoom out a little. If you press shift and you hold R, you can tilt it around and make sure you can align it to the grid, or not to the grid if you don't want to. And with the mining machines, it's usually easy to do it in such a way that it's kind of in an angle. You want at least 6 nodes on every mining machine. I'll explain to you in a second why that is needed, but just keep that in mind. 6 nodes per machine. If you have more, then that's fine. As you can see, I currently have 7. But at least 6. You also want to build your power a little bit away from your mining machines, just so you leave yourself some room. And you can use these Tesla towers in order to spread the power to all your machines. So build that somewhere in the middle of your nodes. And now you should have access to your automated mining, so you never have to mine, in this case, iron ore by hand. Now you basically want to replicate this through the copper ore patch as well. And if you want to be lazy and not farm a lot of trees, you can also build a mining machine at your coal over here, just so you have easy access to fuel all the time. And there you go, I have a mining machine at every spot. I have a Tesla tower in the middle of each node, and then I have some wind turbines in order to make sure we have some power going. If you control click on a building, you can actually pick up whatever is in there, so it's an easy way to easily pick stuff up. Won't work if you're too far away, but generally speaking, you'll be working in a pretty small area for now. Now the next thing you want to do once you set this up is make sure you complete these 4 research items, at least the first 3 after this, because they will give you access to those belts, miners, smelters, and assemblers. And we're going to use those to set up a little tiny factory to get our basic production automated as well. As a side note, try to always be producing something in the early game. It doesn't really matter what you're producing, just try to produce a little bit of everything, because you're going to need a lot more of everything, so you might as just well make sure that you're not wasting any time and just keep the production going in the background. That is our research out of the way, and that means we can start really automating our production, because we definitely don't want to keep handcrafting things for too long. Now, in order to do that, let's build a nice little set of belts like this, one from the iron and one from the copper, and then we're going to build some smelters in order to make sure we can automate our smelting. Now, we're going to set up 3 little smelters. I think that's actually the amount you start with from the get-go as well. We're going to make sure they are powered like this, and we are going to make sure that there's actually a recipe in here. So the one on the right is going to make iron ingots. The one in the middle is going to make copper ingots, and then this one is going to make magnets. And there's a reason we have this order, because that allows us to chain them up in a moment, but you'll see once I do that. So let's connect these up with sorters, so there's actually stuff going in. Now these sorters operate at a 1.5 trips per second speed, so that means that there's 1.5 items going into these facilities. But if I have these sorters move over a longer distance like this, the speed actually goes down because it's a longer distance. So you can see this is operating at half the amount of the shorter distance one. Now this is going to need 1 per second because this recipe requires 1 ore per second, and that means that 0.75 is not going to be enough, so I'm going to connect 2 sorters up to this one because of the distance on this belt. Now you can tidy up the belts if you want, and now we have a nice little set of facilities making some stuff for us automatically, and that already saves us a lot of time. Now in order to make that even more efficient, let's put in some storage units like this, and then connect them up with 2 sorters each. Ideally in such a way that they look nice as well, so I want the sorters to be on the sides. And by doing this, we make sure we have an easy way to pick things up, and it's really easy to see as well what's in here. I do recommend that you reduce the size of your storage facility a little bit, because you won't need hundreds upon hundreds in here. Just a couple of stacks will be fine for now. This is a temporary facility just to get us started. Of course, there's more items that we need, and in order to make those, we are going to need these assemblers. Now, if you put them something like this, let me turn off the blinking lights. That's this one. You will be able to directly connect the storage units up to this one, and you're going to want to connect the copper to both, and then the magnets to one, and then the iron ingots to the other one. And that will allow you to make on the left hand side the magnetic coils, because they need magnets and copper. And on this one you can start making circuit boards because it needs the other 2 items. So there we go, and now we have automated that as well. Now of course ideally we would want to get that in storage as well, so if we just put a copy paste of these storage units from here, shift clicking on a building will copy it along with all the sorters. Any sorter that doesn't actually connect to something won't be built, but as you can see we now automatically have all the sorters, including the setting for the amount of storage that we allow in here. Now currently not everything is powered, so let's make sure we do. There we go. And now we should get a nice little storage of pretty much all the base items that we need, with the exception of a couple of things. So let's expand this a little further. One other thing we're going to need a lot of is belts. So let's remove this because I think that's going to get in the way. Let's copy this smelting facility over here along with its storage facility. So we have a little bit more iron coming in. We might actually want to connect this iron to this one, just to make sure we're putting the overflow into this building. And then let's build a little assembler over here that's going to make gears. This is actually not called cogs, which I initially always kept calling it, so I'm going to try to do it right this time around, guys. So there we go. Let's connect that one up, make sure that's functioning at full speed, and then we're going to set up another one of these. And let's see, how are we going to do that? Let's just keep it neat, and let's do that over here. We should be able to connect that directly. We can, and we'll need a little belt like this, something like this. You can make it shorter, but I like how this looks. And then this is going to be producing some belts. And of course we're going to need once again a storage facility in order to make sure we have somewhere for all those belts to go. Now let's make sure everything is actually powered up. Yes, it is. You can see from the color I have way too few wind turbines at the moment, but we're going to fix that in a second. Let's first set this up. Although we automated a lot of the base materials now, we didn't actually automate science yet. So in order to do that, we're going to build a science lab here and a science lab over here. Actually, this one needs to be a little bit further out because I do want storage box. No, let's not bother with the storage box. Let's just build the 2 like this. This one is going to make blue science from, as you can see, the coils as well as the circuit boards. And then this one is actually going to research for us. And that means that if we connect these 2, then any blue science made over here is automatically going to go towards research. Now, of course, that does mean we need to queue up some research, But before we do that, let's make sure this is actually working. So let's connect that one up like so, and then we can connect this one up like so. And let's bring this belt down here. There we go. And then we can connect everything up. So we'll have signs going in here like this, and signs going in here like this. And again, you can make the belt shorter if that's something that you want to do. I kind of like these longer belts. That's just me. I think that looks neat. So yeah, now we actually automated our blue signs as well, but as you can see from the power, this is far from optimal because of my low power. Everything is moving at a snail's pace. So that's why I also made some wind turbines. And wind turbines, if you drag and drop when you're building them, they will automatically be spaced out in such a way that they are at the minimum amount of distance from each other. And that should easily bump up your power by a lot. As you can see, we're already going up to 50-60%. And of course, we have some more wind turbines to place. The main reason I like building a little facility like this is it really speeds up the expansion later on. So just remember that control clicking on all these facilities, make sure you can easily grab all the resources in there. So as you can see, we now have over 300 belts to go. And because we now automated our blue signs as well, it's time to start putting that to use. Now, basically, you want to look through the tree and find all the things that are really cheap in terms of blue science and just queue them up. Pretty much anything that will result in a new item or a new building, which honestly is most of them, but especially the buildings, just queue them all up and make sure that you start working on that. You won't actually use these buildings for about maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but just making sure you get a head start on all that resource means that this is working while you're doing something else. And that something else is going to be majorly upscaling our production. So I actually want a full belt of magnetic coils and a full belt of circuit boards in order to supply our mall, as well as get a lot of blue signs going, because of course this is not going to cut it. As you can see, it's going really slow. So how much do we actually need in order to do that? Well, a full belt is 6 per second. And normally you would think, because this recipe is producing 2 magnetic coils per second, that you would need 3 of these buildings producing that. However, that's not how this works. If you look at the assembler, you can see that the production speed is 0.75x. That means that this building is actually producing at 75% of the normal production speed. So that means that rather than producing 2 per second, we're actually only producing 1.5 per second. So in order to get 6, we're going to need 4 of them, because 4 times 1.5 is 6 per second. Now, let me show you how you can easily build that. It's worth mentioning that, of course, the circuit board works exactly the same way. Normally it's 2 per second, but because of the 75%, we need 4 buildings of this as well. And in order to build this, you can again shift-click a building, then drag, and if you press tab, you can actually differ the spacing. So if you keep pressing, you see the distance keeps changing, so you can pick whatever formation that you like. Because we need 4 in our case, I like the 2x2, and copying it like this makes it really neat and organized. Of course, we're also going to need some belts and some sorters, and then we're going to need some smelters in order to actually facilitate the amount of stuff we need to get in these buildings. Before we get into that, it's worth noting that if you want to build these longer belts really fast, try to stay as close to the belts as you can, because that will reduce the amount of distance your drones need to cover. So even if it's still slow like this, it's definitely faster than just standing in the middle and letting them fly all over the place. Now, something else to note is that you might want to get yourself a couple of these wireless power towers in order to recharge your mech a lot faster, and I'll show you how those work. So the name is a little deceiving, but these power towers don't actually power your buildings. Well, they can, but they are mostly meant to power your mech. So as you can see, it's a huge boost, and if you are standing in between multiple of them, it actually goes faster. They do draw the energy from your grid, so you might be underproducing while you're charging yourself up. It's a really convenient way to get your mech up and running. Okay, so how do you figure out the ratios in this game? Well, that's mostly by determining how much output you want and then working back from there. So in this case, we want 6 magnetic coils per second. And if you just look at the ratios between the inputs and outputs, if I need 6 coils per second out, I'm also going to need 6 magnets per second coming in, because it's the same number in the inputs and the outputs. At the same time, I only need half that amount, so 3 per second, or half a belt worth of copper ore, copper ingots I should say, because that's a 2-to-1 ratio. And if we look at the circuit boards, the same holds, so we'll need a full belt of iron ingots coming in, but only half a belt of copper ingots. Now, and that's also the reason why I actually have this shared belt in the middle, because what I want to do, and you can use these memos by the way to make things very easy for yourself to remember, this is going to have the copper on it, so that's 2 times half a belt for each, or at least half a belt for each, so 2 times half a belt is exactly a full belt worth of copper ore. And then we're also going to need some iron ingots over here. So this is a really easy way to remember. Now, how many smelters do we need for that? Let's find that out as well. For the copper and iron, this is pretty straightforward. The production speed is 1 per second, and there's no funny business with production speed or anything like that. The smelters just produce at 100% of the original speed. So we need 6 of each, and again, by dragging and tabbing a little bit, we can easily make a nice layout of 6 of those. Now, the magnets are being produced at a 50% slower speed, so 1.5 per 1 being produced. So that means that in order to make 6 per second, we know that we're going to need basically 6 times 1.5 is 9 of these smelters in order to make a full belt of magnets. So that's a little bit more, but it's very straightforward to set that up as well. Now you can see I'm going to have an issue because I need to supply these smelters with raw iron and raw copper, and I don't actually have a way to reach the copper smelters with copper ore like this. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to kind of sidetrack this belt over here and have this input belt go like this. And I'm actually going to do even different. So we're going to connect this up, and then we're going to disconnect this for a moment. And then this is going to be the incoming belt with ore. In this case, I think the ore is going to come from this direction. So let's have the belt go like this and then connect that up as well. And then we can fold that in like this. Now I'm going to finish this and show you how that looks like, and then walk you through my logic there. There's a lot of things to cover here, so let's go through them one by one. First of all, don't forget shift click and then drag and drop and tab, and you can easily build a lot of buildings like this. That saves you a lot of manual work. Then there is another thing that's worth noting here, and that's I actually went from east to west with this build, or vice versa. You could do that as well, for the main reason that I want to avoid any issues with the grid. As you can see, we are building on a square grid, but because the grid is actually on a sphere, there will be little points where it jumps, and that will make a mess out of your belts if you're not careful. So you can see that over here, the grid is actually jumping. So if you build belts from north to south or vice versa, you will get some jumps in your belts, which can be really, really annoying. Speaking of belts, there's exactly 2 miners with at least 6 nodes on every belt. So we have a full belt of raw resources coming in. So there's 2 over here, 2 over here, and then 2 more here down to the south. And of course I needed to make sure we have power poles set up. And the nice thing about these 3x3 layouts is that you can actually easily fit a power pole in between and make sure everything is powered up. The same goes with the 2x2 layouts with the assemblers over here. Now with the storage units over here, I have 1 sorter going in and 2 sorters going out. So this is actually only going to store units if there is a backlog. So you can see that over here, because I can't actually make use of all these items that I'm making over here. Actually forgot to copy the recipe apparently, so let's make sure we fix that. There we go. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it, I believe. So now we have scaled up our production massively, but we're still handcrafting all these buildings, which gets really tedious. And as you can see, I can make a lot of them, but I don't necessarily want to make sure I keep remembering which items I'm supposed to be producing in what order. So Let's scale up our science production, and then let's start working on a mall. In order to get all that science up and running, we're actually going to need a lot of matrix lamps, because this recipe is really slow. It only produces 1 blue science every 3 seconds. So we're actually going to need a total of 3 matrix lamps in order to make just 1 per second. So that means we need 6 times 3 is 18 of these to make 6 per second, and that is what I have over here. Now, as you can see, these things stack, so that is really convenient. They only stack 3 high initially. They will get a lot higher later on, but for now that means we need a total of 6 times a stack of 3, and that should take care of that. Of course, we also need somewhere for all of that science to go and to be outputted and researched and things like that. So we can copy this and make sure, if you press tilde, by the way, if you copy a building and you press tilde, you remove the sorters from it. So if the sorters are not where you want them to, that's a very convenient way to still copy something but not get into too much issues. And there we go. Now, of course, these shouldn't be producing science, but they should be researching instead. And by doing that, we have a lot faster research up and running. Now, the problem with this is that we have barely any power at this point. We're back down to 20%, so we're going to need to place down a lot of wind towers. As an alternative to wind power, you can also use these thermal power plants, and they are a far more compact way to power your facility. One of these is actually worth about 7 of these turbines, but they do run on coal, so it's a finite resource. So keep that in mind. Don't overdo this, because as soon as your coal runs out, this power will run out and your entire factory might come to a standstill, while the wind turbines are of course completely renewable energy. The fun thing about these things is that you can chain them together. As you can see, I have sorters connecting these up to each other, so you don't need to have a belt going to all of these individually. Don't overdo the chaining either, because of course any coal being used up in the first 2 is not going to reach the 3rd one, and so on. So there's a limit to how far you can chain them. I usually just keep it to 3 just for my sanity, but I think you can actually take it a little bit further than that. But yeah, and if you build a couple of these, you will quickly have all your power up and running. And as you can see, our research is now going a lot faster than it used to. So let's start working on that mall. A mall is nothing else than just a simple row of assembling machines, each making a different building. So for example, belts, sorters, but also things like smelters, assemblers, and so on. And then ideally you attach a storage units to it so that you can easily pick those up. Now, if you look at the recipes for all these different buildings, you will see some themes. So there's a lot of buildings that only need, for example, iron and gears and circuit boards. And if you place these assemblers in the correct order next to each other, you can make a pretty efficient layout, so to speak, in order to make all these materials reach as many buildings as possible at the same time without having to kind of make spaghetti all over the place. Now, I've already done that several times before, so I kind of know what order to place my buildings in. So let me show you the end result so you can copy that order if you want to. If you want to puzzle it out for yourself, by all means do so. It's quite fun. At least I thought it was fun, but it's also quite a bit of work. An efficient layout looks something like this. So initially you start out with the 5 basic resources that we've been using pretty much all the time now, with the exception of copper, but we have stone in here, and that covers actually quite a few buildings. So you can make a lot of those buildings from that, just drawing from the belts that actually have the items that you need, and then feeding that into a storage unit. And at some point you will need to swap out the iron for steel, because the more higher tier items need steel in rather than iron. And similarly, the gears are no longer used at that point, but you use glass instead. And that glass is actually also needed to make prisms and exciters, because a couple of those buildings need those. And in the whole way in the back here, we have the awesome item that is called a foundation that you can use to remove obstacles, including water. So you can easily make more complicated layouts and you don't have to worry about the terrain. Now, of course, you do need to actually feed all these resources into your mole in order for it to get working. It doesn't need to be at a very high speed. You just need to make sure there's enough so all of these buildings are slowly being produced. And because this is a slow game, even the slow production will make all the buildings that you need. So in order to do that, let's have a very simple layout. Supplying this mall with resources is actually very straightforward. So I have 6 iron smelters over here on a single belt with a couple of assemblers making gears in order to make the iron and gears. To supply that over here, I have another 6 smelters here feeding into 6 smelters for steel in order to get the steel production going. And of course the circuit boards and magnetic coils are coming from our blue science production because we are producing more than we need. And currently I already did all my blue resources, so I'm not actually using any of that for blue resource either. And I have 3 smelters making stone and 3 smelters making glass over here as well, feeding into the other 2 resources. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. So of course it takes a little bit of time to set that up because you need to connect that to miners, and actually I have the stone coming all the way from over here. But all in all, it's very compact, and once you get it going, as you can see, I can now just pick 30 smelters up from my mall, and that's it. Or let's say 16 assemblers, etc, etc. So now it becomes very trivial to make larger buildings, larger structures, because you are pre-producing all the buildings that you might need. Now, especially some of the more complicated things might not go as fast, especially the things that are a bit further down the line. So for example, over here you can see I'm just making my first oil extractor because the circuit boards were initially being absorbed by all those buildings over here. And that's also why you want to make sure you don't set the capacity too high. At some point you do actually want to make sure you stop producing these buildings, so the buildings further down the line get a bit higher priority at that point. If you ever feel like you're underproducing something and you need more, let's say smelters, that's a very good example most likely, you can always just increase the capacity and make sure you keep producing it after you completed your first stack. If you've gotten this far, you already pretty much completed the early game. And of course, it depends on what you define as the early game. But having your mall set up and ready to go just means everything else after that will be so much faster, and it will be a major time saver in the long run. I, of course, put blueprints to all of this, especially the mall might be very useful to have. If you want to use blueprints, however, you need to go to the upgrade technologies and research the first and second level of mass construction, which will allow you to start building blueprints. And the way I've set these up is that these are basically puzzle pieces that fit together. So for example, the mall consists out of 3 parts that all fit together, and as you can see, this is the side of the mall, and then the mall pieces actually overlap in such a way that you can connect them to each other. So you should try to make sure that each belt just overlaps the last belt of the previous piece, and you can easily connect them together, and voila, you have a mall. You can do that with all the other parts as well, but of course building your own factories is a lot of fun. It's especially the mall that I don't recommend designing more than once. And that's it for this episode. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask me in the comments. I do read all the comments and I will try to reply as fast as I can. If you liked this video and found it useful, don't forget to like it to help others find it as well, and subscribe for more, because there will be more episodes coming out. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I hope to catch you in the next one.